There's something deeply disorienting about studying conspiracy theories long enough that you begin to understand them. Not because they start making sense, but because you begin to understand how millions of people can come to believe them. And once you understand that, once you understand the emotional logic underneath movements like QAnon, you can't really look at American politics the same way ever again. One of the hardest parts about studying conspiracy theories at the scale and complexity of QAnon is that trying to explain them can make you sound insane. In some ways, the work that I've done infiltrating and studying white supremacist, neo-Nazi, and other extremist organizations is actually simpler by comparison. Those groups are dangerous, yes, they're violent, they're organized, but relatively speaking, they're flatter. There are fewer relevant characters, fewer moving parts, fewer layers of mythology. QAnon was something entirely different. At its peak, there were likely tens of millions of Americans actively engaging with QAnon-related content online daily. And I think many Americans still misunderstand what that actually means. A lot of people probably first became aware of QAnon because of the so-called QAnon shaman, the guy in the horned hat who became infamous after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. But reducing QAnon to internet weirdos and one guy in a costume dramatically underestimates how serious this movement actually became. QAnon didn't just spread conspiracy theories about Hillary Clinton or the so-called stolen election. It fueled a broader collapse in people's relationship with reality. Families broke apart. Parents stopped talking to children. Grandparents lost contact with their grandchildren. Brothers and sisters became estranged. Not because of political disagreements, but because the conspiracy theories caused people to believe things that made them dangerous, unstable, untrustworthy. People killed members of their own families because they believed QAnon conspiracy theories. And yet now, as I'm recording this in May of 2026, almost no one talks about QAnon anymore. This movement that consumed enormous portions of the American internet, that radicalized millions of people, that helped fuel the January 6th insurrection, that fundamentally reshaped the Republican Party, it's like we collectively memory hold the entire thing. In the days after January 6th, QAnon dominated cable news. Every major network, every newspaper, every panel discussion. But now, it's almost silence. And I think part of the reason for that silence is because confronting what actually happened would force us to grapple with something much more uncomfortable. QAnon didn't really disappear. Its believers are still here. The same people who spent years convincing themselves that Democrats were satanic pedophiles, that Donald Trump was secretly fighting a war against a global cabal, that mass executions and military tribunals were coming. Those people didn't vanish. They weren't de-radicalized. They were absorbed into the broader MAGA movement. The conspiracy culture remained. The paranoia remained. The rejection of objective reality remained. Only the branding changed. I've said it before on the show that I had been Facebook friends with disgraced former general and convicted felon Mike Flynn ever since he was selected as Donald Trump's national security advisor during the first Trump administration. Though apparently I can't say that anymore because at some point recently he unfriended me. For those who haven't heard, he spent Christmas Day 2025 posting about me on the internet. So I guess maybe that was it. But I bring Flynn up because I watched this transformation that he went through happen in real time. I watched a formerly respected senior general in the United States Army embrace a conspiracy movement that cast him as one of its central heroes, as a messianic figure. QAnon believers imagined Flynn as one of the leaders of what they called the Storm, a fantasy involving mass arrests, executions, military tribunals, and violent retribution against Trump's political enemies. And Flynn encouraged it, not always directly, sometimes through vague gestures, likes, shares, subtle affirmations, thank yous, permission. And because Flynn was a retired general officer, because he wrapped himself in military credibility, millions of people treated him as trustworthy. That credibility grew the QAnon movement tremendously, exponentially. Veterans and military leaders occupy a privileged place in American culture. People often assume service equals integrity, wisdom, honor. Sometimes that trust is earned. Other times it isn't. Flynn understood that. For years, I watched his social media activity very closely. You could often tell when he was nervous about investigations or indictments based on the things that he would post. At one point, just before it became public that he would begin cooperating with investigators, he posted a photo of airplane contrails in the sky that vaguely resembled the shape of a cross. That kind of thing became very common with him. Religious symbolism, apocalyptic language, conspiratorial messaging, and surrounding all of it were hundreds of QAnon followers flooding his page every single day with posts treating him like Jesus. Again, not random trolls, not fringe internet users, Americans, voters, military veterans, parents, police officers, people who genuinely believed that they were participating in some kind of patriotic awakening. And over time, instead of being rejected by the Republican Party, those conspiratorial communities were welcomed into it, and they took it over. After January 6th, there was a brief moment where it seemed possible that Republicans might finally sever themselves from the movement that fueled the insurrection. Instead, they spent years rehabilitating it. The January 6th rioters were turned into martyrs. The conspiracy theorists were normalized. And eventually, the people who helped attack the Capitol were pardoned. And now Donald Trump wants to make them all, the most committed and radicalized of the QAnon movement, millionaires. But people today have flattened them down to violent insurrectionists and election deniers. But they're so much more radicalized and dangerous than those labels communicate. Conspiracy movements do not need to remain centralized to remain dangerous. Once people become conditioned to reject objective reality, once they learn to treat facts as negotiable, once they begin viewing politics as an existential struggle between good and evil, those belief systems become incredibly difficult to reverse. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to speak with Denver Riggleman. Denver is a former Republican congressman from Virginia. He later worked as a senior investigator for the January 6th committee. And he is the author of the book The Breach, which examines the networks, personalities, and conspiracy ecosystems surrounding January 6th. In this conversation, we talk about how QAnon evolved from an internet conspiracy theory into a broader political identity. We talk about why conspiracy culture didn't disappear after January 6th. We also talk about how extremist movements adapt, fragment, and survive. And we talk about what happens to a democracy when millions of people are encouraged to believe that reality itself is negotiable. Now, before we get into it, please like, comment, and share this podcast or video wherever you're listening or watching. Do it now before you forget. It'll help us reach and educate more people who need to understand what's going on and how to fight for our freedom from autocracy. I'm Kris Goldsmith, and this is On Offense. Denver Riggleman, author of The Breach and a bunch of other titles, former congressman, and all-around badass. Where should we begin? We've got Donald Trump issuing a $1.8 billion slush fund that he intends to use to reward all of the people that you investigated. Could you talk to us a bit about The Breach, what your role was on the January 6th committee staff, and what you expect this $1.8 billion slush fund to actually get used for?
Well, again, it's always an honor to be with you, my friend. So it's great to be here. And, the slush fund and what you're looking at with the self-dealing there, the reason that it struck me so hard, Kris, is that I did write the book, The Breach. And when you look at the things that happened during the breach, there was something that QAnon liked to use all the time, and it was even used by Lauren Boebert, who is part of everything that's happening when you're talking about, election denying and things like that, especially with Tina Peters in Colorado. We can go into that. And why this number really struck me when they did the 1776, the 1.776 billion, and they backed into that number saying that's exactly what the damages came out to, which is ludicrous. The fact is it was another dog whistle to QAnon and the conspiracy theories, just like the pardons of the 1,600 individuals like Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, who seemed to be a lot of sexual child molesters in that group that Donald Trump pardoned. But I think after looking at the baseline architecture of what coup-like movements look like, and being the senior technical advisor on the January 6th committee, looking at all the text messages, all the metadata, looking at the phone records, building the actual white nationalist group connections that went all the way to the White House, to the point, Kris, people don't even remember, that the Oath Keepers were texting Andrew Giuliani when he worked directly for the White House, Rudy Giuliani's son, between, I think, October and December of 2020. You just get to a point that you keep seeing the same patterns over and over again. And I think what you're looking at with this slush fund is that pattern of dog whistles. And then obviously you just saw over the last, 24 or 48 hours, where again, they're talking about more powers for the federal government to dictate elections. It's happening again. And that the 2020 election was stolen by the Chinese, which came out in the last 24 hours, which was one of the original conspiracy theories. So what you're seeing again is this whole radicalization pipeline using conspiracy theories and nuttery.
You were the first congressman to really come out hard and give a floor speech about QAnon. And that was in 2019 or was it 2020?
Yeah, me and Tom Malinowski actually put in the first resolution buddy, you're making an old man remember things, Kris. I think into July, early August of 2020, but I had started sort of pounding my chest before my church convention with Confederate flags, if you remember that, when they didn't want to have a primary because I would have won, and Trump hated my guts by then. So you're looking at I started really getting crazy about it probably, and it's so funny you said at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, because when I officiated the same-sex wedding, I started seeing these weird lapel pins, Kris, that people were wearing that said Q. Buddy, I didn't, the only reason, and here's a guy who fought radicalization, right? The only reason that I probably got onto Q first is because I might have been the first congressman attacked by Q because of my officiating the same-sex wedding. It's complete. I don't know if that's fortunate or unfortunate. I don't know what that is, and then I saw one of the governor candidates, Amanda Chase of Virginia, carrying an AR-15 with a Q flag. And I'm like, what is everything that I saw, right? And then I had people coming not only with lapel pins, then they had these T-shirts that said "The Storm." This is just, and I'm like, this looks like a cult. What is Q? And it was at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020 that I really got hooked into it and trying to stop it.
In 2026, I rarely hear anyone talking about QAnon anymore. It seems to be something that has completely fallen off of the radar. There was plenty of talk of it after January 6th because folks who weren't plugged into the conspiracy theories and extremism research that you and I were, years prior, they finally saw the cult come to fruition on January 6th. Is QAnon still around? Is QAnon still a threat? What role is it playing in our current politics?
Yeah, QAnon is the biggest threat. When you have Donald Trump still posting as Q plus, and the plus being a cross on Truth Social, it's much more than a dog whistle, ain't it, Kris? It's like literally, this is what we're going to do. This is even more than the stand back and stand by comment to the Proud Boys. It's a direct message to people who still believe that. So a lot of people are like, well, Denver, but people don't say it anymore. Well, he's still saying it. And everybody around in these rural districts, I'm in one, QAnon is still huge because the belief systems are now instantiated, right? They're cemented into MAGA itself. It's part of the DNA is the QAnon belief system, or you still wouldn't have the stolen election conspiracy things that are happening at rate. It's amazing how much more organized and how much more secretive the conspiracy lines and radicalization are. And when you're looking at Trump coming back to the Chinese server stuff, and I wish I could tell people that comes directly from Patrick Byrne and Phil Waldron and Sidney Powell, by the way, just so people know.
I don't think that most people know who Patrick Byrne is.
Patrick Byrne, right? The multi-millionaire who's the former CEO of Overstock.com. He's also the one who flew Enrique Tarrio and Bianca Gracia to January 6th. He was the one in the December 18th meeting with Trump when you were talking about martial law and using Executive Order 13848 to overturn the election. Maybe one of the biggest funders of radicalization and stupidity we've ever seen. He wrote a book on his conspiracy theories about it. He's obviously in the breach. I put him in there as the Byrne identity. So that's the name of the chapter. But he also was the one who had the affair with the Russian spy, Maria Butina. I think maybe one of the most underrated and dangerous characters in the whole MAGA ecosystem is Patrick Byrne. So when you're looking at these conspiracy theories, QAnon has just become part of the DNA and fabric of MAGA and the Trump administration. It is that. Q is MAGA, MAGA is Q. They're synonymous.
You're someone who focuses, like me, on imposing costs on the bad guys, disincentivizing bad behavior. How are we going to do this after, the next president takes office? I feel like explaining these conspiracy theories, the basis of these conspiracy theories that motivates the QAnon movement, the Lauren Boeberts of the world, like members of Congress still believe in this crazy stuff. Are we reaching a point where it's going to be impossible to explain to a jury what is happening right now and what's going to be happening over the next, 2.5 years?
Kris, you always ask wonderful questions. Yes. Yeah, I was on a stage for our movie, my friend, Against All Enemies, right? And I was on a stage, and I was called the dark one, like the pessimist, right? When looking at what's happening out there, and I still am. Why we're looking at all this radicalization, why we're looking at these conspiracy theories, why you're looking at all these stolen election conspiracy theories, everybody's like, man, Trump looks like he's deteriorating, he's mentally unfit, things of that nature. The issue that I tell people, and here's the problem about unwinding, your question about a jury is so prescient. It's so good. And I know people are like, well, why? Because Kris knows where this is going, right? Is that you've been there and seen this, is how do you explain the multiple layers of batshittery to anybody on anything when you have fantasy as facts completely embedded in somebody's, sort of mental fulcrum, right? That's the way that is actually what makes them split one way or the other. While that's happening, while we have all this cognitive dissonance and incredible insanity, and now you have the left, right, on the left saying there's stolen elections in 2024, which looks exactly like the satellite conspiracy theories from 2020 and the Italian satellites. You got all this stuff happening. What is really going on behind the scenes, my friend? The Trump family is self-dealing and self-enriching on a level we've never seen before. So while everybody's over here in this opaque world of bullshit, we have our boys over here, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, getting $750 million in direct contracts, $620 million in loan and grants from the All Strategic Capital, investing in $20 billion ventures with Anduril, right, and Palantir. You just saw lately, right, with Kazakhstan, looking at them in critical minerals and the $1.6 billion contract they invested after the fact. You have Donald Trump's wealth exploding into the multiple billions now. It's going to be over 7 to 8 billion in the next probably 6 months. And they think they can't quite prove that he holds almost $10 billion in crypto tokens simultaneously, right? Then you're looking at the Board of Peace and the grift that's going there and the billions going back into Trump's pocket with the Board of Peace. So this is the most corrupt administration in our history. And while everybody else is focused on, bullshit, they're doing two things. They're enriching themselves and they're trying to set up a process to take over election districts to see if they can keep the 2026 election, the Republicans, and in 2028. And my mind's exploding because it's the exact same pattern as 2020. Accuse everybody of stealing elections while you're trying to use process and disenfranchisement to ensure that you keep the majority. So it's a pretty interesting dynamic.
I think that, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that you and I a few years ago used to be people about process and people about institutions and trying to do things the right way, the way that they've been done historically. At what point do we need to start throwing out some of the rules and just making sure that justice has meted out? One of my concerns is that Donald Trump, the person, will not live long enough to see justice. He won't live long enough to see us bulldoze everything with his name on it. He won't live long enough to see us, strip the ill-gotten gains that his family has acquired because of his role as president and because of his corruption. Is that a concern that we should act on, or should we stick to the norms and let this be another multi-year process, like the Mueller report was, like Jack Smith's investigations were? Do we keep doing things maybe not as slowly as Merrick Garland, but according to the rule book, the way that Merrick Garland kept things?
The problem, and it's an incredible question too, because me and you are pretty familiar with asymmetric warfare. And there's a reason I've been telling people, do I have to get back into politics because of what I'm seeing, even though I'd rather self-immolate than run again. You have to be a bit of a narcissist, sociopath, or ability to go one tribal side or the other without any nuance to run in this environment. And so I think you need a third or fourth way. So the first asymmetric thing is now it's time for another way. It just has to happen, right? I've never seen the crazy and the feckless go at it like I have for the Republicans and the Democrats. And when you talked about Merrick Garland, I have no confidence in our institutions, because institutions are based on integrity too, right, Kris? I mean, It was like, well, everything, look, we're doing good here, we're doing good there. Not really. How do we claw back we're never claw back the billions of dollars that the Trump family, they have generational wealth we can't touch now. They're completely hooked into Musk. They're completely hooked into the Founders Fund with Peter Thiel. I don't think people realize that they have completely inoculated themselves from really us going after them financially too, because we don't know where those crypto flows are going overseas. And the Board of Peace is a fantastic way to hide any types of money. I mean, this is what he does. I mean, They're getting still Trump Tower deals around the world, man. I mean, come on. You know what I mean? So I think we're to a point that if we don't start looking at this in another way, and that's asymmetrically, we're in trouble. Institutions have completely failed us. But how do we get that back? Kris, buddy, I wish I had an answer. People are like, well, Denver, you're out there warning people. What's the solution? Well, what's your solution? What is a solution? Right? What is it really if we are allowing this 4 years to completely destroy not only our institutions, but allowing wealth to accrue in a way through self-dealing? Either you're talking about, Leary in Utah to Elon Musk with this ridiculous IPO, right, for SpaceX. You have contracts being forced or sole sourced to large companies without competitive actually bids. It's the process of self-enrichment that I think that people have not seen, Kris. And I don't know how to go after that. If we allow this to keep going for another 2.5 years, I think it's going to be a generational slog for us to have men and women of integrity back into positions in the U.S. government. But if we have 35% of people continually MAGA, and we have another 20 to 30% on the other side also starting to get into conspiracy theories and radicalization, because you know about the boomerang effect, buddy. Me and you know more about reciprocal data and reciprocal radicalization about anybody on the planet. That's my biggest fear, is what happens to the 40% of the sane and the rational in the middle? What do you do? How do we fight a multi-flank war? And I think that's the issue that I'm having right now.
Yeah, I struggle. I'm someone who's obsessed enough with justice that I've got her tattooed on my arm. And I struggle with the idea of just letting it go. I mean, it's not who I've ever been. And when I see the greatest heist in history from the Treasury, $2 billion getting directed to his brown shirts, I struggle to think that like we can go through the normal process and then I like wonder who I'm becoming. It is the authoritarian's goal is to make you feel that there is no right or better answer. You only have to go with the authoritarian solution. And I don't know how to resist those impulses.
I don't either. Buddy, man, you talk about getting into a personal conversation with me and you right now. They tried to pre-lube this, right? With saying the left is the violent ones. When it's through statistics, through specific empirical evidence. I mean, it's a ridiculous thing to say the left or there's some kind of transgender crime wave I'm not aware of, Kris, out there by the far right, I think it's pretty incredible that when you have people that were former military or you have people that have been used to confrontation, and I'm trying to stay within the institutional sort of boundaries of law and rules, right, that me and you really love. And you're looking at an institution that has no laws or rules, and somehow we're supposed to still pay taxes, go to the IRS, do the right things, go for the right permitting, go through competitive bids, do all the things that you're supposed to do as an American, where you had this Potemkin village of fairness. That's even gone, my friend. This is the most, we are living in a self-identified, authoritarian, fascist, bizarre, I don't even know what you would call it. It's like a violent idiocracy mixed with with some kind of bizarre kakistocracy on top of an oligarchy. I don't even know what to call it anymore. It's just simple insanity. It's almost like fantasy-based autocracy. I don't even know what to call it anymore. I'm out of words, my friend. And I think that this feeling of helplessness and this feeling of aggression seems to combine sometimes. Then you're like, either I got to jump back into politics, right? Or I got to make some decisions whether I'm staying here or I'm going to stay here and fight. Because right now, this is where it could go. And that violence quotient, you can almost feel the tension coming into the midterms. I know you can, but it's also the data. And that's what frightens me.
You and I have spent a great deal of time, especially between 2021 and 2025, designing and participating in war games, some of them very well funded. One of them that I participated in was made into a movie. And,
saw that, yeah.
And yet there seems to be no funding for the problem solvers. You're talking about this magnetism towards getting back involved in politics that you feel, right? But that's going to suck you straight into a world of phone time, of calling and begging for money, because there doesn't seem to be the impulse on the left to just fund the change makers. One of the things that made Charlie Kirk so dangerous was that he never had to worry about feeding his family. Right? That was the advantage that Charlie Kirk had that no one on the left ever did, was that he could plan, he could strategize, he could make multi-year plans, he could go and participate in giveaways, right? The whole thing that made Turning Point USA so popular was that they would show up on campus and they would give away free stuff. And when you're a college kid and you're $100,000 in debt, a free hot dog is pretty great, right?
A T-shirt to wear to class.
Yeah. And like,
you're right.
Is there a way that we can convince funders on the left to stop making people like us do the dog and pony show? Because I have like PTSD from fucking war games. Every time someone calls me up and is like, "Oh, participate in another war game," and it's like I come up with all the threat scenarios that end up happening a year later, exactly as I wrote them, but you didn't fund the solution part. I told you the problems that were coming. I gave you the potential solutions, but you didn't fund the solutions. You just get to sit back and be like, oh, these grant makers sit back and go, oh, this is good. I know what's going to happen now. But it's like, you could prevent the bad from happening. Is there a way to break this refusal to not invest in people and instead just invest in events? Like that's the thing. They want these convenings all the time, right?
Yeah,
and the funders who are probably going to listen to this show and turn off on this episode, never listen to me again. I hope they stick with it, because this is the problem here. Like, I don't have a job right now. My income is at the whim of algorithms.
It's when I saw Mark Cuban standing behind Donald Trump, I knew that, what a belly crawler.
Mm-hmm.
Just the worst kind of human being. We're talking about somebody who is adjudicated, when I'm talking about Trump, adjudicated for sexual assault and a felon. And we still have billionaires who say they're independent or on the left or marginally center left, still belly crawling like the boys they are, the betas they are. Well, we got to do something good and right now. You're worried about retribution. I shouldn't be on this show. I have a company, a good one. I shouldn't be here, Kris. If I was 100% only worried about every single fiduciary responsibility that I have, I don't know why I'm on here. Am I putting myself at risk? Why would I give anybody money that has a paper trail to a nonprofit if I can be audited by the IRS, cut out of contracts even commercially, called a supply chain threat, right? Which you saw happen to Anthropic, right? All that stuff is absolutely happening in a country that's no longer free. So what you're saying is that MAGA has always self-funded with their billionaires on a level we can't imagine. And here I am trying to get investment or grow companies with people like, well, I'm worried if somebody sees this. It's cowardice, but it's also reality. Mm-hmm. So the reason you're not seeing this big funding is because I don't want to use words by Billy Butcher on The Boys, but you can imagine what comes into my mind, right? Who is really doing this? Where's Reid Hoffman, except doing AI videos talking to himself, right? And I think those are the things that get me angry, is that I'm telling you this, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, the Ellisons, they don't have any problem, right, doing that kind of funding. People don't have a problem funding Leonard Leo to make sure the Supreme Court's manipulated. The right funds their own companies too. If you think about the Office of Strategic Capital, Vulcan Elements, which was Donald Trump, one of the companies he's invested in, $620 million was funded. The biggest grant/loan in the history of the United States went to Donald Trump Jr.'s investment company, Vulcan Elements. And then guess what happened next, buddy? $50 million went to Power Us, another drone company that Eric and Donnie Jr. have, right? So here's the issue that you have, is that people are terrified, Kris, of feeding their families and things like that. While the right uses hyperbole, radicalization, and billions, now we're going to get into the trillions of dollars to fund radicalization operations like Turning Point USA, and there's nothing we can do about it. Mm-hmm. And that's the issue. Back to your original question, right? It cannot be clawed back. They are like ticks on a dog's ass. It's very difficult to get them out of there. And that's the issue that you have right now, buddy, is that I don't know how to do this, but I'm trying to figure it out as I go along. I'm trying to build this plane while I'm flying it, my friend.
I know that feeling so well, and it sucks.
It does.
What is the thing that the January 6th, the political response to January 6th that we got so wrong that maybe we can get right? Coming from someone who was inside, who saw all the data, who made all of the connections. You were on a committee, right? That it was technically bipartisan, but we live in an environment where, the president of the United States, former president of the United States, then Donald Trump, could threaten anyone's life if they considered joining the committee or voting to impeach him or voting to convict him. Are we going to end up with another feckless committee that has no real power, that spends several years enforcing subpoenas, and then we don't see the vast majority of the conspirators ever actually held to account? Would a 9/11 style commission, would it be able to do the things that the committee couldn't do? Or am I just off, on my interpretation of the way that the committee was structured and its limitations?
No, you're not off at all, buddy. I think what people don't understand, and I know you do, is that Congress does not have law enforcement authorities. It's public trust. So people are like, wait, what do you mean? Well, I'm not going to be arresting anybody, right? We don't have those authorities. The other thing, too, about the January 6th committee is that I think it started with the best of intentions. What happened with me, which is pretty personal, is that I thought there should be a counterterrorism, domestic terrorism investigation, and politically it became just, can we identify Trump as the one problem node, which was maybe one of the biggest mistakes ever made, and there's a couple reasons. Number one, Congress is by DNA political, and everybody had their own political agenda. Also, a counterterrorism or data analytic investigation, Congress is fundamentally unprepared, lacks the talent, and is unable to do something at that complexity level. You needed to have a counterterrorism fusion center, which I identified. I had the funding, I thought, then they pulled it. We got about a fifth to a seventh of the funding we should have had to conduct an investigation at that scale. The other thing, too, is that we know that the data was never utilized. We had the encryption keys for the phone records, text message, and metadata. The FBI never accessed them. Not only that, when you look at the FBI, everybody wants to say that everybody was somehow heroes. The FBI also lacks some talent and being able to move quickly in the DOJ. That's because that Congress and FBI and DOJ should have been working together, pushing evidence right back to them immediately rather than any stonewalling for people who wanted to take credit. The other thing, too, is that people were afraid of the data itself. So then we became making decisions based on political language and what should be released or not released instead of telling American people the specific facts. This was a coup attempt. If anybody else says anything different, you're either being gaslit or you just haven't looked at the facts or the data. If we're going to do this again in Congress, there's a flip side to it. Now I'll play devil's advocate. Congress is uniquely positioned with being able to fund committees to get the right people in place to do the work if they have the will to be right and to care about their constituents, the whole American populace, rather than their own political careers. The January 6th committee, as well as it's done, has turned out to be quite the wet fart. And there's been a few books like mine written, other people like Sedition Hunters, stuff like that people should read. But January 6th committee really was the fulcrum for Trump to be reelected based on more radicalization and conspiracy theories about it. And it really comes down to we didn't move fast, hard enough. We were afraid of facts and truth. And if I had to do it over again, I'd have been more bold. But I really thought the DOJ and FBI would take that mantle and run with it. I really did, Kris. And I think that goes back to your original question. Can we even trust institutions when you have billionaires and a process and a belief system that's so integrated into our financial structures now?
The FBI that you dealt with had not really been purged. I mean, there was disruption at the very top, but this FBI that we have now in our country has been purged of everyone who was involved in January 6th investigations. Most of the FBI agents who specialize in Iran, because there was some overlap there. It's been purged of most FBI agents who specialized in the greatest threat to our security, which is domestic extremists, violent white nationalists, violent white supremacists. Is it possible to create a hiring program that could lure back some of these people with who are technically savvy, who are knowledgeable, they have full careers investigating complex financial crimes? Do you see it being possible for a future administration to beef up the FBI in a way that isn't as extreme and dangerous as the way that ICE has been expanded, but could bring it back to a level of effectiveness that you wish you had after January 6th?
I'm glad you asked easy questions, man. Man, I tell you, easy. I think what you're talking about here, Kris, is here's what. So the FBI with Kash Patel is pretty much a political organization, even though I'm sure and I know there's FBI individuals keeping their head down who despise what's become of the FBI. But when it comes to larger cases against political figures, it's specifically a political police force for Donald Trump. That's all it is, just like DHS. That's all it is. Kash Patel maybe is the most corrupt, most incompetent, right? Least talented, bizarre, fantasy-believing nutcase to ever be in a position of power in law enforcement in the United States. But that's the truth. It's fact. And I don't care what anybody says about it. The thing is, though, I think there's people that are still there that are real Americans in the FBI. If you look at Tulsi Gabbard and the CIA, we're definitely know there's people in the CIA who think that our country's going the wrong way very, very quickly. Gabbard, again, everything I said about Kash Patel, except likes to be in a cult. I mean, it's just to add some more to it. I don't know why. It'd be very difficult for me as a 20-something-year-old to say, I'm going to go in the FBI, which I think is a sort of apolitical law enforcement organization, saying that it can change one way or the other through this type of churn every 4 years if it gets that crazy. Why would you do that? You know, you're going into a place that right now, if you're a MAGA FBI person, you're loving life. But I'm telling you what, in 2026, Democrats take control of the House, or if you have a Democratic player in 28, you have a complete switch again, a purge. And they should. They should purge every single person Kash Patel brought in. Because anybody that Kash Patel brought in is part of a criminal organization called the Trump Organization. It should be done. And Kash Patel should be investigated. They should look at his, use of private jets. They should use where his money went. They should monitor his accounts. They should follow the money. There should be a complete investigation. Do Democrats or even independents have the will to do that? No. Not the way it should be done. It has to be a complete dissembling of the architectures and infrastructure that's been built by the Trump administration. And I would humbly submit, Kris, I don't think anybody has the will to do that on the Democratic Party.
Imagine Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer disappeared.
Yeah.
Who could lead the House and Senate to be effective? And like effective? let's be realistic. Like I think about Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut. Mm-hmm. I think he's got a pretty decent head on his shoulders. I see him, and I'm, for like full disclosure, as a lobbyist for a veterans organization, I work closely with his office. My impression of him is that he actually knows what he's talking about. And he's not there for the power and prestige the way that I think Chuck Schumer is. In the House, I look at someone like Jamie Raskin, who, he's got health issues. He's getting older, so I don't know if he'll be in a position to lead. But Jamie Raskin is brilliant, a constitutional lawyer who I think is probably was the most effective communicator around January 6th. Do you see anyone rising in 2020, after 26 and after the 28 elections to power? If you had a magic wand and you could convince the Democratic Party to vote for new leadership, is there someone currently in Congress, in the House, and in the Senate that you could see doing a good job?
I really like your Chris Murphy idea. I think he really is the one. But you do have people like Patty Murray, things like that, right, Kris? There's people that are there. I think what happens is that you get people caught in districts that are or states that are completely safe. It's about fundraising, right? Mm-hmm. And you're going to look at how much is Chuck Schumer fundraising? Who's he beholden to? What money lines do we lose if Chuck Schumer is no longer the Senate leader? It's the same with Hakeem Jeffries. That's the calculus, right? When McCarthy got booted out for Mike Johnson, fundraising plummeted to the point they had to go back to McCarthy to get him to fundraise again. So right, and that's the issue that you have, is that this isn't about what's good for the American people. It's about what's good for the party fundraising lines. That's it. That is the only calculus. I was there, and that's the issue. Chuck Schumer is, I would say, one of the most ineffective Senate leaders. He is one of the most ineffective Senate leaders I've ever seen. And what's interesting to me is that he might have been effective when you had some kind of institutional integrity or something. But when you have a Senate leader come out and say, "I'm glad they released the UFO stuff," he automatically disqualifies himself, because that's ludicrous. That's literal unhinged insanity to thank the president for that. Everything else happening, you don't go out and say, "Well, I'm glad for your UFO disclosure, but let's talk about the $620 million loan to your son." You know what I mean, buddy? Mm-hmm. House side. Whew. It's tough. A lot of the people that I liked are gone, like the Mikey Sherrills, Abigail Spanbergers. You can't do too progressive because you're going to lose your fundraising lines. People are like, "What, Den?" But we need tough. Yeah, tough doesn't raise you money, right? You have to find somebody who has those, fundraising chops, doesn't rock the boat too much for the big billionaire backroom donors for dark money, right? That's the issue that you have. And I hate to be so blunt, Kris, but I mean, sadly, there's no lever for the American people to honestly apply for the right people to be in positions of power, because you're not rich. Mm-hmm. All of Congress is driven by money. It's all transactional. That's it. And the few people who think they're going to rise up, whether you're a Massey on one side, and listen, Massey's a nutter. So funny. People are like, "Oh, he's a hero." Oh, good Lord. You know this, right? But you think, and I find it funny too, and I know I piss people off, but if people think AOC is going to be the leader of the Democratic Party, you're not going to win an election a long time at the national level. And so now you have this bizarre thing happening. People want to fight, but you got to find a fighter that can also maneuver through the tricky wicket of fundraising and the tricky wicket of making sure your party doesn't get too far behind to fund the congressional races. So now you have that issue, and it goes back to a two-party system. They completely control everything, and you have to have a disruptor. You have to have disruption now, or our country's doomed, because we're heading to $40 trillion in debt. What did Donald Trump, what's he responsible for now, Kris? 27% of the total debt in the history of the United States is under the Trump administration. That's what you got, guys. And I think if we don't have a disruption, a third, fourth party or something else where there's a massive faction within the parties, we're in deep, deep shit.
Do you still consider yourself a Republican?
No.
Okay. So I asked that because you were a Republican member of Congress, and you were one of the I think true conservatives. We probably disagree on a lot of policies, but I wonder, as a former Republican, what do you think about the straight power plays? If Democrats were you have a Democratic House, Democratic Senate, and they win the presidency in 29. If their priority was making D.C. and Puerto Rico states, expanding the Supreme Court so that the Roberts Court is no longer what it is, a rubber stamp for authoritarianism, as a former Republican, is that a plan that you would go along with?
Partly. And people are like, "What? Denver said that?" Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll start with what I wouldn't do, because it's so brutally, the cascading effects I think would be brutal, is expanding the Supreme Court. And here's why. And I've had this debate with people, and they're like, "Well, yeah, but right now we need it. Here's the problem. How much does it expand the next time to get the majority? There's no end to it." If you open that can of worms, that Pandora's box, I would just ask people to consider what it looks like downstream. If Democrats specifically expand the court, do Republicans expand the court next time? Then what do we have, 90 Supreme Court judges? How does that work? And right? When you're looking at ages, I think the best thing for the Supreme Court is probably an 18-year term, but I would actually submit a 15-year term.
Mm-hmm.
I think it actually should be shorter. So that's just Denver Riggleman's opinion, though, based on when I look at cascading effects. As far as, oh goodness, buddy, Puerto Rico should be a state. DC will never be a state. Not that I see, but I tell you, Puerto Rico is a state. That's a noble objective,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's something that could really help going forward. You know, I think what the problem is, buddy, again, is what is the will of the good? And I hate to be so blunt, but it's going to cost you treasure. It's going to cost you attacks, maybe family and personal. And I think that's the exhaustion of it. You know, I was a Republican congressman, and I changed so quickly from somebody not being in politics to, once I did the wedding, you would think at 48 or 49 years old, Kris, being in intelligence as long as I have, that I would understand human nature. But Congress is a weird beast. And what I found, that there is no real debate. Everything's staged. It's bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, man, what am I doing here? This is it? This is what, I'm a congressman. There's only been 11,000 of us in the history of the United States. I am one of them. Wow. What a historically cool thing to be. But I'm also the guy who gets hit by both sides, because I was a Republican congressman, then I was the first to be kicked out because of QAnon, and nobody gave a shit. Nobody cared. Mm-hmm. Now they do. But I kept saying, it's coming. Speeches on the floor, you know what I did. And it was, I might as well have been pissing in the wind, Kris. You know, it was, right? It's, you know, I told people, my grandfather said, never piss uphill because it just gets in your boots. You know what I mean? So that's really what it was. So your questions are so fantastic. The Supreme Court thing could be very dangerous long-term. Puerto Rico, yes. DC, I mean, it should, but it's never going to happen, I don't think. But I think the one thing on the Puerto Rico statehood, I think, is an objective that should be aggressively, I would say, pursued. Mm-hmm. But it just comes down to, you know what it is, Kris? And I know I anger people. Who are you looking at to be Democrats? Who are you looking at? Is there something else out there besides this Democrat-Republican tribes where you have to pick between one or the other? And I think now, because of technology, because of the incredible sophistication of financial instruments, because of the Supreme Court's belly showing, because of Citizens United, because of all of that, we have two parties that can corporately control each vertical no matter what we do. It is money driven. And it's so blatant now, it's not even hidden. There isn't even a pretend that there's some kind of compromise, right? It's us or it's you. It's us or them. And again, it comes back to, is America ready for disruption politically on a level they've never seen before, with something that's not a Democrat or Republican, but are people ready to face the fact that they've been, in some terms, right, overcome by radical beliefs, or that they become radicalized themselves on how much they hate the other side? And that would make it very difficult for a disruptor, as I argue against myself, Kris, again. So there you go, right? That's, again, some of the things I think about.
So relatedly, as a former member of Congress, as someone who ran congressional staff, you had your office in D.C., you had your local offices. Do you think it's a good idea to expand the House, to grow Congress, to which means there's the potential for more gerrymandering but we have never been, our vote as individual citizens has never been diluted more when it comes to the House. My experience working with congressional staff, and very briefly being an intern for Senator Gillibrand for a summer in D.C., I don't think that congressional staff in the House or Senate can do the job that they need to do. And I don't think especially now with the gerrymandering wars, that members of Congress can honestly represent their constituents. Do you think that expanding the House is something that should be a priority? Do you think that there's too many dangers involved with that? And also, I want to hear what your thoughts on what you felt your congressional staff was able to handle with your budget.
Ooh, all right. So the MRA, we're going. Goodness gracious, Kris, here we go. Here we go. I love these questions, man. I was having this discussion with somebody last week about representation. You think about my district. Before, when it was gerrymandered to look like a dragon riding a scooter. That's pretty much what my district looked like, man. 10,000 square miles, size of New Jersey, a little bigger than New Jersey. Went from the D.C. suburbs all the way to the North Carolina border, 21 counties, 2 cities, Charlottesville and Danville, 37 initial committee members that could vote for anything, many of them so far to the right. Anybody who joins a local committee, you have people actually, maybe 10% really care. The other 90% love the power, right? They're like little Stalins. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I think 750,000 is too much. We're going to get to a point it's 800,000, 810,000, 820,000. So right now, the politicians are picking the voters. The voters aren't picking the politicians. That's what's happening. I think it should be 500,000. I think that's a number that we can utilize. Should it be lower? Yes. I think, what was the original, Kris? Was it 50,000 was one congressman back in the day? Something like that.
I wish I should know.
It's from the beginning. I think people can, but I think I'm close. Yeah, I think I'm close. So yeah, I think we should grow Congress. It's probably an imperative at some point, because you just can't. It's too unwieldy. Even if we add 50 or 60 more, everybody's like, well, more people is more unwieldy. Well, maybe. There's a lot of people are still going to vote in blocks. But what if you had, I would say committees or that were more representative, but what if you had elected officials that were more representative? Both of those. And that's a long, long conversation with me and you. Mm-hmm. So yes, I think there should be more representation.
I think about, the area that I grew up in, Long Island. The world of difference. Long Island has changed a lot since I grew up. It's become kind of like MAGA land, which is not what I thought I grew up in. But I think about, the geographically how close Wall Street is to Staten Island, and how close Midtown is to Harlem, and to think that, members of Congress are stretching across these really, really different neighborhoods that have tons of people, right?
Perfect.
These small geographically, but have tons of people. Look at AOC. She's very popular in her district, but her district also voted for Donald Trump. And they did that because they wanted a disruptor, generally speaking. But I imagine that if her district were smaller, there'd be far less overlap. There's definitely some MAGA areas in that district.
I think the argument one way and the other is pretty interesting, right, Kris? One is you want a representative that can have a manageable population to represent. Second thing is you want it diverse. But on the other hand, right, if it's too big and too unwieldy, you're actually not an effective representative if it's too diverse. So there's issues, right? And a lot of those issues are just sort of calmed down by really trying to limit gerrymandering with independent commissions and increasing the number of representatives per population. That's what I think. I mean, it sounds simplistic. Maybe it is. But you talked about the MRA, how much money we got. I got $1.4 million for 18 full-time employees, 9 federal, 9 district, and I could have 2 part-time. So it was about 20 total, 18 full-time. But that's also to pay for your office space, your district office spaces, right? All incidentals. It's not enough. Plus, if you have 18 people working on that salary, you're not getting the best talent. We call them swamp creatures, right? They just go from staff to staff, where they eventually want to be a legislative director, they want to lead comms, they want to be a chief staff. Exactly. That's it, right? So there's not enough money per congressional office. People are like, oh my God, but even making $174,000, if you think about 10 years ago, that's probably equivalent of $120,000, $110,000. You should pay congressional representatives more nominally. But the issue that you have then, right, is that it still is not going to stop them from being financially motivated to raise money or to try to position themselves for jobs once they get out into lobbying. But you don't have the biggest talent, coming into Congress now. If people like me aren't going in, and I'm not being arrogant, there was not really smart people in Congress. I mean, you got so many believe that abductions are real, or that Bigfoot actually comes to their backyard and partakes of apple pie, right? I mean, they're insane. I mean, from Luna on down, right? Or Burlinson. So you got a bunch of crazies. So yeah, I think the MRA budget needs to go up. I think representation needs to be more representative. I think Puerto Rico should be a state. And I also think, again, that after all of this, I don't know if we have the will to disrupt in a way where we can go after those who have integrated themselves into the financial system so thoroughly that the billions that they're going to harvest, I don't know if we can ever claw it back unless we have some of the bravest, most courageous people we've ever seen in our history.
I think a lot about my time as a lobbyist. I was probably the lowest paid lobbyist on the Hill. I work for Vietnam Veterans of America. It's a pretty, financially speaking, very conservative organization. My colleagues at any other veteran service organization were paid about what they deserved, which was more than twice what I was getting paid. But still, most of the people that I interacted with on the Hill throughout my years there were paid less than me. And I could tell from the happy hours, and you become friends with these people. The lobbyists and the staff. They spend, especially in the veterans community, because there's a lot of veterans, and there's a lot of there's a relatively small population of veterans who are actually interested in federal policy, which I find to be amazing.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah.
So it is a small group, and I just think about being in the position of a young staffer all the time, of just everyone that you sit down with is making more money than you, and how demoralizing it has got to be, because what I see staffers feeling, and I know a lot of people look down on people who work in Washington, is they're doing this out of patriotic duty. Especially the youngest of the staffers who have no power, they are doing it out of patriotic duty. But they sit down next to an Air Force general who's coming there to talk about the NDAA, or someone from Lockheed Martin who's coming to talk about the NDAA. These staffers only have so much time in a day to do research, and eventually they reach the point where they're just like, well, this person looks trustworthy, so I'm just gonna tell my member to vote the way that they're going. Could the budget actually, realistically, and we've seen Donald Trump do some crazy shit, right? And this Congress do some crazy shit. Do you think that there would be a public backlash against paying congressional staff more? Because I kind of think that it's very easy for members of Congress to demonize their own staff. And I think that is some of what would happen if the next administration, the next Congress, tried to pay their staff better.
Everybody should listen to you. You've been there, done that, as I have. And, I just want to tell you, you're one of the good guys. And, a lot of people want to demonize not only staff, but lobbyists immediately. I always said there's good lobbyists and bad lobbyists, and you know exactly what I mean. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about the staff, abused, not paid enough, and actually do all the work. And you have a lot of people like the Nancy Maces of the world, and people on the left too, and I know them, where the staff writes most of their stuff, push it through ledge affairs. And really, there's a lot of congressional representatives that are worried about their comm shop and what they look like on TV rather than doing real work. So staffers not only are abused and underpaid, they also run the entire congressional back shops, everything. from the LD on down. So it's pretty interesting dynamic. We have to fund Congress better when it comes to staffing, or we need to have rules put in place where the staffers are paid a certain percentage of the MRA. So I am absolutely with you, because right now with the staffers and how overworked they are, lobbyists write the bills, and that's where you were going. It was a brilliant segue, by the way, Kris. But that's the truth. Lobbyists write the bills, and most of the congressional representatives go with where the donations are from, and those lobbyists are usually the people that support the congressman through their donations. So it's the biggest self-licking ice cream cone in America.
All right. I've got 2 minutes left of your time, so I'm going to ask you one last question. How can people listening to this podcast, watching it on YouTube, how can they go on offense?
I mean, the first thing for me is I've always told everybody it's a house-to-house fight, and you know where I'm going with this, is that what I see people is capitulate, whether you're in a party atmosphere or people that might be on your side still saying crazy things, or people on the other side. You have to stand your ground when it comes to facts, truth, data, but also the moral compass that you have. Just because somebody's louder doesn't mean they're correct. You need to confront, right, with specificity. And even if you don't have the specific facts, you do not let somebody run over you. You also have to be more involved in your local politics. You have to jump in. You have to feel uncomfortable. You have to be scared, right? You have to. Listen, courage isn't about not having fear. Courage is about overcoming fear. And listen, every day, and Kris, I don't even want to do this anymore. I feel like I'm pissing in the wind all the time doing this, but I'm still out here because I still think there's that vestige of the American spirit of what we think about freedom and natural rights that we still need to fight for. So here's my thing. There is no one way, but there is one thing you should never do, and that's to back down from bullies and back down from those, whether you're at a Thanksgiving dinner, you're at a picnic, you're at a church event, you're wherever, or you're in a park walking your dog. It is a house-to-house fight, and it's up to you to engage on every single level and do everything you can do, because that's the only power you have is what's within you to engage in that fight.
Denver Riggleman, veteran, former member of Congress, January 6th investigator, author of The Breach and many other titles, and co-star of Against All Enemies. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can people follow you, support your work?
I'm the simplest dude. Just go to Denver Riggleman on Substack, Denver, the number 4 VA on X, and on Blue Sky, Denver Riggleman. As you can see, I'm such a, I'm very simple. I'm a simple man, Kris. I'm a simple man.
Well, thank you for being a simple man in the way that you are.
Thanks, buddy.
Have a good one, Denver.
Thanks, brother.
One of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with Denver Riggleman is because I think a lot of Americans still misunderstand what January 6th actually was. They understand it as a riot, as a beginning of something, or as an end of something linear. But what Denver actually helped investigate, and what many of us who studied these movements in real time understood almost immediately, is that January 6th was the product of years of conspiratorial conditioning. And then it was just one day, one event. It didn't mark the beginning or the end of something. It was just one node in a giant, complex web. It was the result of millions of people being taught to distrust institutions, reject objective reality, and believe that violence might be morally justified if it helped save the country from imagined enemies. And the problem is that those belief systems didn't disappear after the attack failed. They adapted. Some became quieter. Some movements fractured. Some influencers rebranded. But the conspiratorial infrastructure remained. The internalized distrust, paranoia, and radicalization remained. And in many ways, it became more dangerous because it stopped looking abnormal. That normalization is one of the things that Denver and I kept returning to throughout this conversation. How movements that once felt fringe became mainstream. How conspiracy theories become political identity. How democratic societies slowly acclimate to things that once would have shocked them. Because none of this happened overnight. And if we're going to push back effectively, then we need to understand how these movements actually grow. Not just online, not just politically, but emotionally, socially, culturally. That's what makes conspiracy movements so powerful. They don't just give people answers, they give people belonging, purpose, identity, community. And unless democratic movements understand that reality, we're going to continue underestimating the threat. If you enjoyed this episode or found it useful, please help us get in front of more people. Subscribe to On Offense wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave a review. Share this episode with someone in your life. And if you're watching on YouTube, like the video and leave a comment. Those interactions genuinely help independent media projects like this reach larger audiences. And if you'd like to support my work directly, you can subscribe to my Substack at onoffense.substack.com. On Offense is produced by Gina Kim and edited by the Lombardos for the Valor Media Network. Thanks for listening. I'm Kris Goldsmith, and I'll see you next time.